Hi, I am Dr. Tiffany Rao, and welcome to this webinar titled Creating Clarity in Virtual Teaching so Students Learn More and Stress Less. I am going to be going over really instructional organization in an online teaching situation. So I teach in the Department of Special Education here at Cal State Fullerton, although this webinar will be generally focused, not specific to special education, but just focused on general online teaching. So thank you so much for joining me. I know you're all very busy, and these have been some interesting times, and I really applaud you for taking the time out of your schedule to further your skills and be here to learn more. So what I'm going to cover is kind of twofold. I'm going to talk about instructional organization and online teaching, so how you can organize your content as well as a little bit of like visual organization. And then I'm also going to talk about how you can help students organize their learning and become more competent online learners, which there's a lot of independence involved in that. And that can be kind of tricky for a lot of students to figure out what works for them. So I'm going to talk to you about some ways to help students figure that out. All right, so the first thing I want to mention is content chunking. So I'm going to talk about content chunking as well as visual chunking. You are probably familiar with content chunking because it is so important to all teaching, and it's especially relevant to organizing your online instruction. But just a really brief definition, it's basically breaking down large amounts of content or information into smaller chunks that are more manageable and easier to remember. And this whole concept comes out of research that was done back in 1956 when a researcher and psychologist determined that humans can hold about 5 to 9 chunks of information in their working memory at a time. So if you think back, if you're old enough to remember when we all had to memorize phone numbers, or I mean, we all have our own phone number memorized, right? And a phone number is 7 to 10 with the area code numbers. That falls pretty much within this range of information that we can remember. So it's 5 to 9 chunks of information that we can remember at one time. After that, we won't remember or be able to use additional information. Now, there's been some disagreement in terms of whether it's 5 to 9 or whether it's a little higher than that, but you know, that's kind of a good rule to keep in mind, is 5 to 9 is fairly well accepted as how much we can remember. And when we learn new information, it needs to be learned, practiced, and applied in order to be stored in our long-term memory, so that then we can add more and learn more bits of information. So here's a few how-tos when you're thinking about chunking the content of what you're teaching. Number one, you've got to prioritize the information. And this is where your planning comes into play. There's so much to be taught, so much that somebody can learn about any given topic. So you've got to look at your unit that you're going to teach, or your lesson, or your topic, however you're looking at it, and start by separating the information into need to know and nice to know. This is one way to go about it. Need to know and nice to know. And just have that kind of separate. Now, when you have that, you might choose to throw out all the nice to know, because as you can see on the next bullet point, less is more. Or if you have students that really always want to learn more, if you have some students that you're providing enrichment for, then the nice to know might be part of your enrichment for any students that do want to learn more. So I kind of like that, where you could have some separate enrichment activities with the nice to know information. And then just focus on that need to know. That is going to help you have more clarity in your instruction, and the students have more clarity as they receive your instruction. And then I'm sure, as you've seen, there is so many resources available online right now, more than ever, to teachers. And it can be too much. If you're finding so many cool websites and videos and tutorials and all of these things to teach a topic, and then you're putting them all out there, your students might get overwhelmed and almost kind of shut down. We don't want that. So again, less is more. If you present too much at once, they may either not remember the information because it's going to exceed our capabilities, or might even just like avoid engaging with that content just because it looks like too much. So then you want to separate your primary supporting materials from your secondary supporting materials, okay? And just present the primary, like the very best, maybe 1 or 2 videos that they can choose from, 1 or 2 websites that they can read, whatever you're providing for your students. Obviously, it varies by grade level and all of that, but just a couple of choices, or maybe not always choices, just video, this, so that it is clearer and less overwhelming. And then I recommend going through again one more time and combing through your lesson or your unit or your activity before you post it, and sort of Marie Kondo your content, keep or toss, right? I have to do this in my closet and in various cabinets and areas of my house all the time, right? Go back, keep or toss. Do I want to keep this or do I want to toss this? So do that again so that you're really whittling it down to what's most important. Now, again, you don't actually have to toss anything, but you might put it in a separate enrichment file that's optional for students, or just save it for yourself. And as you go on, if you think students might be interested in another resource or learning more, then you can share that. But it's really important, as you're presenting information to your students, to make sure that it's whittled down and not too overwhelming. And that's going to increase your clarity a lot. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention, another way that you can prioritize the information, and we do this in special education a lot, is if you imagine like an upside down triangle, and at the top, if you divide it into 3, the top of the triangle is what all students should learn. The middle of the triangle is what some students may learn or will learn. And then the bottom of the triangle is what a few students may learn or will learn. And then that way you are prioritizing your information. Here is the most important foundation of what I want all students to learn. And then I'm going to offer this for students that want further, and then I'm going to offer this for students that want further. But again, on that like first screen of assignments, whatever platform you're using, keep it to what's most important that you've whittled down. And then finally, listicles, right? You know what a listicle is. You click on an article and you scroll down and you wait for the bullet points, or it's just an infographic of lists, bullet points. They're fun. We live in the age of listicles. Why are they so popular? Because they work really well with our brain. So you can use this in your teaching, create listicles for your students on a particular topic, or find one that's already created, because there's a good chance there might already be one floating around out there. But, you know, bullets, numbered lists are easy ways to present information clearly. By nature, we're skimmers. We skim content instead of reading every word. So organizing your content into lists is one way to create a concise presentation, and then your students will still take in the most important content even if they're skimming through the list. It won't work for everything, but if it seems like it would fit with certain subjects, that's a great way to go. So here's one example. I got this from elearningindustry.com, that they had this example and I really liked it. So I'm borrowing it, but of course giving them credit. A couple of examples of unchunked information versus chunked information. So you can see under the unchunked, that's a paragraph, and there's really hard to kind of skim it and get the gist of it. A lot of information all jumbled up there, versus the same information chunked, and look at how much nicer and clearer that looks. If you had a choice, most people would choose to read the chunked version of that content to understand the gist of what's going on. And here is another example I wrote here up at the top. When content is chunked properly, it leads to better comprehension for the learner, which leads to formation of mind maps, which leads to being better remembered, information being better remembered, and more easily recalled. Now, when I say mind maps, I know there's mind mapping, which is sort of an instructional support approach. But what I'm talking about is actual connections in the neurons of your brain, which is what we want. That's when learning is occurring, is when our mind is kind of looking like this high-tech 3D map of connections between our neurons. That's the kind of mind mapping I'm talking about. So here is a chunked version, visual version of what I just said. Well-chunked instruction leads to increased comprehension, leads to mind mapping, which leads to information being stored in long-term memory and better recall of information. Visual chunking. Okay, so I talked about content chunking, but we also want to think about how we are presenting everything visually. So when you're thinking about this, keep in mind the screen size of your students' devices. From what I'm seeing out there in the field, it looks like everybody's on a tablet. I'm sure some students at home might be using a laptop, but it's looking like the majority of students are using a tablet provided by the school district. So keep that in mind. Heavy text is not recommended, like heavy, dense text to read is not recommended for mobile devices. And it's also not recommended to have learners be scrolling down to read a lot of content. It should be presented visually in an orderly manner with a logical flow. And then if you're able to add some audio to your information, you can chunk even further if you're able to do that and your students are able to access the audio. Then you have a little more freedom. And then, of course, chunking doesn't always work, so I just want to kind of mention this. When you must, there are times that we just have to explain things in detail. They need all the detail, and it's a lot. So for certain subjects, we're just going to have to give a lot of information at once. It may have to be not visually chunked, not content chunked. They're just going to have to read the information like a textbook, but maybe you're going to present it online for them to read. And that's just part of the deal that we have to do. If you can pair that with a video of you explaining it as well, that will be even better. And if you don't have audio to go along with information, you will just need to present more details visually. You can still chunk the curriculum, but the visual chunking might not always be practical. Good models for clarity and online instruction is Khan Academy #1, right? They're sort of the bigwig in terms of good online instruction that is clear to follow and engaging to students. So if you haven't, which most people have, at least checked it out, I would recommend just spending a little bit of time on some of these resources or anything else that you might find, really looking at how things are organized. You won't have all the technological possibilities that they do, because they have access to a lot more than some school districts, but you can just kind of use it as a model. So Khan Academy, there's another one called e-learning for kids that's free, and that's a great example as well. The Scholastic website, I really like the way that they chunk their instruction and their materials by day, like day 1, day 2, day 3. They cover a certain topic and then it's chunked by day. And that's, I think, a very nice example to follow. And then also, you know, if you're using Google Classroom and you want to see some different ideas, in case you're not aware, there are a ton of tutorials on YouTube, and you can kind of see how some other teachers have organized things. And then another resource that I love, but I know you're watching this as a video, so I couldn't really give you a link, but it's on commonsense.org. I love that website, and I used it for a lot of different things. And there is, if you search for best tools for distance learning, a resource is going to pop up that I think is very helpful. So you could check that out as well. And now I just want to talk about also helping students to become competent online learners. So you could do everything perfectly with your online instruction, and you're still going to have a lot of students at home kind of wandering around or playing on their devices all day and not figuring out how to focus and organize their day for learning. And they may or may not have parents at home able to support them with that. So here are some tips on how to kind of prepare your students for independent learning and hold them as accountable as we can. First and foremost, we got to spend time teaching how to use the online learning tools that you will be sharing and utilizing in your teaching. So if you are planning ahead for the fall, I would plan to spend some time just like you would at the beginning of every school year. We spend time teaching classroom rules and procedures. And I don't know about you, but I used to pretty much spend the whole first week just on that. And then the rest of, and even into the second week, we'd still be like reviewing. So I didn't teach a lot of content really. It was like getting to know you. I think that's pretty common. Getting to know you and teaching classroom procedures. Here is how we're going to do things. Here is how to be successful in this classroom, right? So think about how you're going to do that, but for a virtual setting. Whether you're going to be teaching virtually full-time or part-time, this is a really important step. So like I said, just like you would be doing, investing really that time, make sure you're doing it so that you can show your students how to be successful in this classroom that is now online or partly online. What are they going to need to know to be successful? And I would present this information in multiple formats, including video, text, and screencasting tutorials. You may also be able to teach them in person how to access this, and that will be really helpful. But just remember to present it in multiple formats. And as much as possible, try to stick with the same learning tools, learning platforms that you use at the beginning. Of course, things change and we have to be flexible and new things come out that we want to use, and that's really cool. But just keep in mind that it's going to take some, when they have to learn a new online platform or what have you, it might take a little bit away from content teaching, and that's just a decision that you make, and it might be the right decision, but if you can stick with the same ones, it's going to save you some time. So we really have to help students understand their independent working style, and it's not going to be the same for all students. So for younger students, they're going to need you to do more of the organizing their schedule, right? So for younger students, you might go ahead and construct a schedule for all of them to follow. And make sure, if you're doing that, make sure you include plenty of time for movement, brain breaks, sensory breaks. I have some suggestions in a couple of slides coming up for those sorts of breaks. So you might go ahead and set their schedule for them, 9 a.m. to 9:30, do your math assignment, etc., etc. Now, I wrote for 4th grade and up, but you can use your own judgment. Maybe your 3rd graders would be ready. Maybe your 4th graders wouldn't be ready. You know your students, so you'd make the call on that. But at that point, I think it can really be a huge benefit to teach students how to organize their own schedules. So you could provide options and examples of a daily schedule versus a daily checkoff. Some people, kids and adults, do better with a schedule that's like math time is here, reading time is here, exercise time is here. Others do better with a check sheet. Do this math assignment, do this reading assignment, do this, do 30 minutes of activity, exercise, whatever. And then they can do it in whatever order they want, in whatever order feels right. Maybe they wake up full of energy and they need to go run around and then settle down to their work rather than following a schedule that might not work for them. So I recommend having students try, like towards the beginning of the school year maybe, try a daily schedule for 1 week, take some notes and reflect on how that went for them and share that with you, and then try a daily checkoff for the next week and reflect and share with you how that went for them. And then they can choose which one, or maybe a combination, and they can sort of set their own schedule. I think that this can be a really great opportunity for our students to learn more about their learning styles and be proactive in that process. Take ownership. And then I found this resource that I love so much. Procrastination has a really negative connotation to it, right? We guilt ourselves so much. Oh, I'm such a procrastinator. But procrastination is a natural human habit. And so we're better off using it positively, using it to work for ourselves instead of wallowing in guilt about it. So if you want to learn more about that, Adam Grant is a great resource. And there's an article called The Perks of Procrastination. He also did a TED talk on it. So if you search for Adam Grant procrastination, some good resources will come up. And then there is a self-test. So I love this idea to have your students take a procrastination self-test so that they can learn about their style and then start learning how to apply the principles from Adam Grant to make their natural style work in their favor. So if you don't want to write down that long website that I listed up here, just search procrastination self-test mind tools and it should pop up for you. A few other things to work with your students on and encourage them to do. Oops. Okay. So we all have different times of the day that we're more focused, right? I'm a morning person. Other people need more time to wake up, and then their focus time is like 10 a.m. Some people are night owls. We don't really want to encourage. I don't think the parents would really love it if we encourage students to be working late into the night. But think about like school day times. Have students kind of track their focus. You can create maybe a self-monitoring tracking sheet to just rate their level of focus. Of course, you know, younger kids, this wouldn't probably be appropriate for kinder or first graders, but fourth grade, maybe third grade and up, definitely high school and middle school and upper grade, they could start tracking their focus. How focused are they on a scale of 1 to 5? You can scale of 1 to 3. You can kind of tailor it to their level at different times of the day. And then that can help them create their schedule, their daily schedule for learning. And then another idea that you can encourage your students to try, see if it helps them, is research shows that walking and learning at the same time can be very effective for some people. It helps us to retain information and keep the mind sharp. So this is another thing, you know, if you want to do like, let's do a 2-week trial of finding your learning style, that's another great idea to do at the beginning of the school year, is spend time helping students find their independent learning style. And this could be an assignment where you say, okay, you know, if you're able to take a walk in your neighborhood or around your house or whatever will work, and listen to this video or this tutorial, or read these notes even on a sheet of paper or whatever. It doesn't have to be on a device. It could be paper, pencil notes, or on a device. And do that while you walk, and then jot down how that went. Did it help them learn more? Did it help them retain more? And if that's something that's helpful for some students, then they might want to incorporate that for certain subjects where it makes sense. Some students do well if they have a dedicated space for learning, while other students might not need that. So again, they're going to have to listen to themselves, try some different things out, and really take ownership of what works. But you can encourage them to set up a space in their home, if they're able to, for their learning. And even if they move around from place to place, you know, everything can kind of be in that spot. Again, do take the time to do this, because as we know, not all parents are able to really be present to help them with this because they're working and whatnot. And then also, just as we have flexible seating in our classrooms, many classrooms are moving towards that now. You could offer suggestions for flexible seating at home, because flexible seating has been shown to increase focus and help students learn better when they are in a comfortable learning position. So, you know, you could give them some different options, such as sitting up straight in a chair at a desk, lying on the floor on your tummy. Some students need to stand sometimes, so you might put your device, set it up on the kitchen counter, and stand while you're watching a video or reading something. And then these are some activities to encourage students to engage in intentions for the day and reflections. So I've talked about kind of reflecting already, you know, trying out some different styles, trying out different scheduling approaches, and then reflecting on that. Now, it's going to need to be more of a structured reflection rather than just thinking about it. I would really want to see students jotting down notes, or even if they're younger, maybe talking to their parents and having the parents jot down notes, if that's feasible, about what works for them. And this is kind of an extension of that. So it can be really helpful to set intentions for the day. So you might ask students at the beginning of every day to identify how they're feeling about the day and then plan what they need to get done. Plan out some ideas for how they want to spend their free time and what are some strategies that help them stay motivated that they learned perhaps from when you were working with them to find that out, to help them learn about themselves. Now, you could do this at the beginning of every day, and they could either write it or email it to you, or they could talk about it in a video and send that to you. Maybe every day, if that seems excessive, maybe on Mondays at the beginning of the week. And then they can share this with you, hold themselves accountable, and then you might be able to offer some advice at that point in time, offer some feedback. And this sets them up for a good self-constructed schedule and intentions for the day. And then I would have students take a few minutes at the end of the day as they're wrapping up their learning to review what worked and maybe think of some strategies that may need altering for the next day. And then they should share their reflections with you. And I got this from Edutopia, this particular idea, which was specifically about students with learning disabilities and how to keep students with learning disabilities, some strategies that can help students with learning disabilities stay motivated at home. So like I said, you could do this every day or Monday and Friday. This is intentions and reflections, but in the beginning, it might be more like trial and error and reflections, where they're still figuring out what's working. And you would want to set students up for that. You may have some days that you had very good intentions, but you just weren't focused. Reflect about that. Use a growth mindset to think about what happened and what might work better the next day. For some students, it helps, they need a break maybe every 20 or 30 minutes. So you can encourage them to set a timer. Other students can work for like an hour. So they'll need to figure out when they get antsy, and then they can set a timer. So if they can work for 30 minutes or they want to try to work for 45 minutes, they can set a timer, just make themselves work for that long, and then they get a 15-minute break to do whatever they want. And let's see, I have break ideas coming up here in a minute. But here's one more idea that from that article I mentioned a moment before from Edutopia. And that is practice mindful hyperfocus. So this is a process that you could spend time teaching to your students. And it goes like this. You select an assignment or an activity, set a timer for a stopping point, get all distractions out of sight and out of mind, focus solely on that one activity or assignment and nothing else. And then when the timer ends, they can take a break. So that's what I was talking about before, but it's more broken down here. And you could teach this to your students step by step and start with like a really easy assignment or activity so that they can experience some success, and then be able to apply this method to future instruction, future remote learning activities. And another quiz that I thought was really great, another self-assessment, is called How Persistent Are You? So if you just search for that, it's on a website called fourscreens.net. It's a really great quiz, wouldn't work for all age levels, but you can check it out and just helps give kids some insight on themselves and kind of where they happen to fall in terms of being persistent and where they might have areas to grow. Okay, so let me make sure I didn't skip. All right. So also encourage students to take breaks, of course, and they might need some suggestions because most of our students are probably going to go straight for screen time for a break. And some of that is okay, but we also want them getting fresh air. We want them having a balanced day, right? And they're on their screens already for learning. So we want to introduce some other activities, just remind them of some of their other activities that they can do. It would be great to do a little bit of each of these every day for a very balanced day. So there are sensory breaks. Sensory breaks can be really great. Might be blowing bubbles or playing in water with parent permission, playing with something squishy, playing with a pet, using fidgets, hugging someone. That gives us some good sensory and feel-good input. Playing in sand, playing with dough or clay. And teenagers wouldn't be into all of that, but certainly kids through really 5th, 6th grade, a lot of them still enjoy a lot of these sensory activities. And I know some teenagers that love to play with squish. I personally love to play with squishies. They're very satisfying. If you haven't tried some kids squishies, I recommend them. So those can be a really great way to just give yourself a break. Movement breaks, of course, they could go for a walk, they could do an exercise video, walk the dog, run around your house safely. But there's a ton of yoga for kids. So you could provide some links and some options there. Brain breaks. Now, when I mean brain breaks, I mean give your brain a break, not like more things for your brain to think of. I mean, our kids all of us need to zone out once in a while, right? We focus, and then we got to just veg for a little while before we can get back to it. So maybe they're going to watch a favorite TV show if they're allowed to do that. Or maybe they're going to watch some funny videos online, or again, hug someone, play with a pet, go outside and take pictures of small things, or meditate. And again, you could include some links, some suggestions for your students to meditate at their level. There are tons of cool free meditations online for kids at all levels. And that can provide a brain break as well. Some people really benefit from, I call it a work with your hands break, because I thought about calling it a creativity break, but it's not. Sometimes that's a little too focused, and it doesn't always have to be like creative. It can just be like doing things with your hands. So again, like maybe playing with squishies or using fidgets, or drawing, tearing paper, cutting and pasting, making origami, doing crafts, whatever that particular child is into. And then social breaks. We do want to encourage our students to continue being social. So they might use a break to FaceTime or call a friend, write a letter to a relative, join some social groups online with parent permission, or just hang out with their family. So those were just a few suggestions to create clarity, as well as create clarity in your online instruction, as well as encourage and teach students how to be independent learners. In summary, make sure you are chunking and prioritizing your content, pay attention to your visual design, use good models of online instruction to learn more about how you can organize things in a clear way. And teach your students to be independent learners by spending plenty of time up front teaching how to use online platforms and helping them learn about their personal learning styles through things like quizzes, directly teaching them how to really focus and be mindful, and encouraging things like intentions and reflections. And finally, here are a few sources that I used for this webinar. And that's it. So thank you so much again for joining me. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.